Welcome to the second author community meetup for the culture of why and the rise of AI. For today, the agenda is very simple. We're going to cover the members' introduction. Second, I'll do an update on the interview. And third, I'll do a book update, where I am, what is happening with the writing, the interview schedule, everything else. So let's get started.
All right. Really glad to be here for that kickoff of your next book. I've really enjoyed your first book. And so just to introduce myself, my name is Satish Shenoy. I am a corporate executive or senior leader, and then also an author and a speaker and a family man based in Austin, two wonderful kids. So I wrote this book called The Runaway Growth. It's a story of the journeys we undertake in order to reach some of our almost impossible goals. In this book, I share the principles, the insights, and the lessons I used to reach my goal of completing marathons across all 7 continents. I ran almost 8,000 miles in 8 years. But when I started, I could barely do a beer run, right? So you can see, so whether you're a runner, an entrepreneur, a student, or a business professional, this book will help you, hopefully will inspire you and provide you with a framework to help you reach your impossible goal.
As I was saying, like each interview is getting better than the other, and each one is unique in a certain way. So this week, actually, I got the chance to interview Carlos Granda, board member, advisor, CEO, and CX executive, over 30 years in the technology sector in different customer success or experience roles, from SVP at RingCentral, VP at Google Cloud, SAP, Salesforce, BMC, VMware, you name it. It's like a long journey in the industry, understanding inside out the customer. And his perspective on AI was extremely enriching in understanding how that the CS and CX overall is going to be changed and how some of the pillars of that will look like. If you're interested to learn more, you're welcome to join this author community, because that's what we're going to cover in the Q&A section in a few minutes. Yeah, so let's talk a bit about the book updates. So far, I haven't written as much as I thought I would be writing. There is always a fluctuating in the writing process. So sometimes you're writing, and then sometimes because I'm now doing more of the interviews, I actually have 2-3 scheduled more. I have to thank John Sanders, because he introduced me to multiple people which I have reached out, and Malu as well, which both are in this community and couldn't join today. So introductions are awesome. It helps me really get reach to people to get their perspective and insights. And at this point, I'm trying to target different industries and how they understand AI and how they understand AI will impact their sector for the most part. So that has been quite exciting. What is happening as well, I had 2 conversations which I wanted to bring out. So this week as well, Cornelia, which introduced herself in the last meeting, we were on a call, and she asked me a really interesting question. She said, aren't you worried about this virtual world taking over and making people less connected to nature and everything else? And I'm like, no, actually, I think we are so rich in how we can approach this level of connection that we can achieve in so many ways. And it's not this or that. It's not an either or. And everyone's context is different. So everyone in their level and their understanding in what they need now is going to be different. So virtual worlds will be helpful. AI will support and supplement and facilitate that to be more seamless, and as well our connection to nature and everything else which is happening, where an energy is maintained and all of that. I believe in that richness, and I think it's an interesting aspect which I will bring into the book even further, because it is really speaking to the foundation, which is the connections, not necessarily the content, which is what you end up using. These are just the mechanism. These are just the tools. These are just the avenues and how we connect or establish these things. So I thought it was very interesting, and it's something gave me more ideas on what to bring as elements in the book. The second thing which I want to bring out, which is a point which came up in the interview with Carlos, he brought up so far I've been trying to cover identity, agency in some of these content structure. And one he brought up, which is obvious and not so obvious, is like things will become more real time. And I think that's fascinating. Like AI is going to increase the efficiency in doing so many things and having access to certain data points, especially like in his experience from a CX lens, to become more real time. And that aspect is really changes everything almost. Is if we are more in now in the real time, or things are happening in that context, and that's how we approach our customers, that's how we're approaching life, what that does would do. So that's going to be one, and we delved into that. I think we spent so much time talking about it, and it was really interesting. So you get to hear more of that in the book itself.
So, Carlo, you started the second book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they say for a first-time author, write like you write and do things like a second-time author, right?
Yes.
You've lived through writing the first book. You're in the second book journey, and you are not going to repeat some of the challenges you had the first time. You've learned some things. But they say the best way to be a first-time author is do things like a second-time author would.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, so far in your second-time author journey, are there 2, 3, 4 things that you would share with a first-time author who wants to get on that journey and who is really excited to share something with the world? And whether it's AI or,
Absolutely. That's a great question. That's a really good question. There's multiple things, I would say. And even so, the interesting thing is when you're a first-time author, you're told a lot of things, but you haven't experienced those things. So you don't necessarily understand the weight and the prioritization as much as you do when you're a second-time author, even if you are trying to write as a second-time author, right?
It's like a parent, right?
Yeah, right.
It's almost like a parent. Your book is like your child, and
exactly. Right.
You
so
have your
no
baby.
Matter. So as much as people tell you it's like one thing to have the baby, it's another actually to be told about having a baby, right? It's a very different thing, like right when it materializes when you do the writing. So the lessons, one of the key things I would say starting even before the writing is really talking about the book beforehand, which is what I'm doing now. Like, right? I think that's extremely important because you will never have enough time for marketing or you will not have, and that's not just marketing, it's just people knowing about the book. And what you don't realize is knowing about the book and actually is really a lot of the effort. And the more now it's so easy because now I'm creating the content. It's much easier than after because there is something which happens where after you write it, you need like a break from it for a while because you've been in it for so long. You're just like, you need to disconnect. And that's the time where you need the most time into it. Like you're doing the initial launch, the marketing efforts, everything. So that's an interesting. And what, you've went through it as well. What was your experience? And I'll share more, but.
So I would say, first things first, be clear in your mind, what's your big idea?
Yeah.
And what's unique about your take, right? I mean, there's 15 different ways to do one thing, right? Whether it is do marketing or do sales or whatever, right?
Yeah.
What is your unique perspective or worldview that you're bringing to the book that will give readers a very different perspective, one they've never seen before, right? So be clear about what's your big idea. I would say start with, and doing some of this thinking, right? I would go on long walks, right? 3 hours, 4-hour walks, because I wanted to be clear about what it is I wanted to tell the world. What's the big idea? In my case, it's a simple but profound idea, I think, right? The idea that every impossible goal is possible if you take one step at a time. Very simple idea. Keep taking one more step. Because if you do that consistently, and if you do that continuously, you will reach your finish line. And the marathon is a great analogy for that, because I remember starting marathons and thinking, oh my God, there is 26 miles to go, right? But then I also remember that if I keep taking one more step, no matter what, and I'd say I guarantee it, you will come to the finish line. It's maybe sooner or later, you will come. All the ask is keep taking one more step.
I'll adjust this. I love that, and I'll adjust it a little bit, and I'll say, each step will make the clarity even more clear. That's very interesting, right? It's each step, no matter how you think things are clear, each step will make it clearer, even when you think that what you had in the beginning was clear. And I think that's fascinating about it. Right?
Absolutely.
It kind of develops itself in some ways where each step as well, in the way, as I'm developing this, and as we've seen, every time, every discussion, every build up in the process is not diverging from the initial idea, but it's enriching it. And somehow it's becoming clearer, even though in my head it's been clear. Like, I know exactly what the book is about and what I want to get the audience or the readers to get out of it. And yet there is always an improvement in how how you approach it, or how the perspective changes from different discussions, different interviews, and each step enriches it, right? So that I think it aligns.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say, people ask me, so how do you know your perspective is unique?
Yeah.
And you know what I tell them? Can you guess?
No.
There's a nice quote called the best leaders are the best readers, right? Because that's about knowledge and all that. I think the same quote applies to authors. The best authors are the best readers. The more you read, the more you know. And the more you know, the less you feel that you know everything, right? Every time I read something, I think, oh my God, I don't know anything, right, about this topic. Or maybe I thought I knew, but clearly, there's so much more to know. But in that process, you figure out what it is that you might not know or might be useful for your reader.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think the more you read, because then you're understanding where there is gaps, and I think the idea comes to you because you're seeing a gap. Like, usually, at least for me, it's always about like some problem that I see and I'm like, I haven't figured out, because what the book ends up being is a research in itself and trying to solve that problem. Like, right? It's not an assumption. A book is a problem to solve. It's not necessarily an answer to be found. Like, the answer people, when they read it, they feel it's an answer, but that's usually not the case in the beginning, and that's why it's a gap. And what I feel I would add to that is, it should scare you. Like, truly, it should. It's because when something is unique, it tends to scare us. Like, that's our reaction intentionally. And if the idea doesn't scare you, like, question why, because that will give you an opportunity to see, like, what is it? Is it too common? Is it already been solved? Is it an issue like that not necessarily already addressed, or you've covered it? And question that, because that's a really interesting way of making a very easy internal assessment on top of like reading and like getting. But does it scare you? Is there an element of it that you feel like you're uncertain or about? And if that's the case, I think that's a good starting point, because it means like something is lacking. The gap is there for the most part.
Correct. I mean, it's like any business, right? When you talk to a customer and you're solving a pain point, your reader is like that customer. I actually, I love this idea. I have this empty chair sitting on my desk.
Yeah.
I put my reader in this chair.
Okay.
Because when I wrote my first book, and I'm in the process of writing a couple more, I would say, I would turn to that chair and say, what would my reader like to hear?
Okay.
Imagine that, this is done at a few companies, I guess, where they'll come into a meeting room, they'll have a meeting, but then they'll leave one chair empty.
Okay.
That chair represents the customer. In this case, in our case, as authors, it's the reader.
It's the reader.
And you have to ask, what would the reader say about what you're writing? Would the reader find value? Would the reader be bored? Would the reader jump in excitement that they've just discovered something? What is it, right? So it's very interesting, and I love what you said about questions and answers, right? Every reader will have a different question, and they may get a different answer from the book.
Yeah.
Remember that everybody's questions are going to be different.
Absolutely. And I like the idea. It's like you're really simulating that the customer is already there, and like that kind of idea of projecting ahead of time shapes your thinking as much. No matter what you have now, it's no longer just you in the picture. There is as well the reader in the picture. And then automatically it's like a three-way conversation instead of like a two-way between you and the book. It's between you and the book and the reader. And that kind of changes the dynamic as well on what is relevant, what's not relevant. I see that in the editing phase usually as well a lot. Okay, this is interesting, but this is too long to get to, or it's going to lose, at this point the reader is going to be lost. It doesn't mean it's not a good piece of writing. It just means for the reader in this context, it's no longer relevant. And then once you have that three-way conversation, not necessarily just between you alone, then it kind of it changes what the book ends up being.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, but I think we captured a few things already now that are important for the first time author to know about how to write like a second time author.
Thank you so much for listening. I would love if you are able to join our community. You can go to realitycheck.institute/culture of why to join the author community.